Welcome to the Change the Game podcast, where we're changing the game by doing business differently and highlighting stories of capitalism at its best. I'm Steve Baker, and with me as always is Rich Armstrong, president of the Great Game of Business and co-author of our new book, Get in the Game, How to Create Rapid Financial Results and Lasting Cultural Change. Hi, Rich.
Hey, Steve, how are you?
Really good. I'm tremendously excited today because it's not just a one-on-one kind of podcast. We have three very special guests today with us from SRC, our parent company, and we're talking today about culture committees, specifically what we call at SRC ownership culture committees, as we're an employee-owned company. And so our three guests have different roles that have played an important part in making our culture committees, as we call them, OCCs, ownership culture committees, really successful on a wide basis with between 1,800 and 2,000 people. I think it's awesome. So let's welcome our special guests. First, we have Krisi Schell, our Executive Vice President of HR at SRC Holdings Corp. We've got Danielle Rapp, Marketing and Communication Managers at SRC Holdings, and Rob Shear, the champion of our Ownership Culture Committee Owners Cup this year, Rob Shear, General Manager at SRC of Lexington. Hi, everybody.
Good morning.
Hey, Steve.
It's great to have you here. Look, it's really easy for me to talk about all this great stuff that we've got going on, but this is something that I think you guys need to explain, because a lot of our listeners may not understand what a culture committee is, much less an ownership culture committee. SRC implemented culture committees across the entire organization, so 10 companies, and again, 1,800 people quite a while ago. In fact, Rich and I were both involved in that. Over the past few years, they've gained a lot of attention and traction. Krisi, maybe we could start with you, if you could explain what a culture committee is, a little bit of the genesis of SRC's use of culture committees and what they're supposed to do.
Absolutely. So ownership culture committees are very common among employee-owned organizations. For those that may be listening that are members of the NCEO or ESOP Association, that's a big piece, right? You got to find champions within your organization that can help communicate and spread the word about what is important in being an employee-owned organization. Within SRC, we had a group, and I know Rich was a part of that, and Steve and Keith Boatwright and many others, who visited other employee-owned organizations prior to 2011, took some best practices, and then established a structure across SRC companies for having ownership culture committees in our organization. All of that was done right ahead of us going 100% employee-owned. And it was such a big step that we wanted to be sure as an organization that people understood the importance of it, what it meant, how it was going to change the contribution, how it was going to change their wealth long-term and the stake in the outcome of the organization. So that was put into place in 2011. I actually joined the organization in 2013. And so this was already, the structure was there. And one of my roles when I came in as organization development manager was to be the chair of the Ownership Culture Steering Committee. That is a role that Danielle, who is here with us today, now serves in that capacity. But it was a great way for me to come in and learn about our culture and really, from a holdings perspective, provide support to each of our companies. And we were focused on two things primarily. One, how can we up our game, right? As the birthplace of the great game of business, it's really important to us that we strengthen and sustain our culture. And so that was one of the primary objectives of our ownership culture committees. Second, make sure that we continue to educate and communicate around what it means to be an employee-owned organization. And we had a fantastic group in that committee in 2013, and they were very passionate about continuing to strengthen our game. And they also talked about the fact that, what can we do to leverage that competitive spirit? And so we're going to talk a little bit later, I think, about the game that was created to do that. When you talk about the purpose of an ownership culture committee, we actually have a formal document that lays out, it's our purpose document. And the primary purpose is to educate, to be a two-way conduit between our associates across the organization and their management teams. And to really champion that culture throughout. So we can get into the details of that, but if someone's interested, that's something we readily share. If people are thinking about putting an ownership culture committee together, happy to share some tips as well as that purpose document to kind of give a roadmap to do that.
Yeah,
Krisi, that's awesome.
absolutely. Yeah, that's you. Now we've gone almost, I guess, probably over a decade, right, with these ownership culture committees. Can you talk a little bit about some of the outward benefits that you've seen from this, and how it has helped the organization in terms of its culture?
Well, there's so many benefits to having the committees. So for one, you have a group of people that feels that accountability, right? It's not just one person. It's not just the leadership team. It's actually, the committees are made up of people from all different levels and all different areas of the organization. And what we try to do is we look for those informal leaders. I always tell people, as you're comprising your committee, look for the people that everybody goes to when something happens and says, hey, is this really what's going on? You know, is this the truth? Because those are your trusted associates across your organization. So look for those individuals that are really passionate about your culture. And that's a good way to comprise that committee. And we have, through the years, we've got opportunities where you get people that come in and maybe they have that want to get ahead and be promoted from within. So these committees not only provide education, that communication, but they also, this committee gives these individuals a chance to stretch and develop their leadership skills. They get to form a team, right? They have to find their best way to effectively communicate with management on what the needs are and how they want to go about meeting their goals. They have to set goals, but also then they have to figure out, okay, how do we communicate back to our peers and the associates on what it is that they're accomplishing, and sometimes what's management's perspective, as you go through. So in this past year, it was very beneficial to have these committees because we had a lot of challenges, and we saw our organizations use their ownership culture committees in various ways to communicate, to solve, try in a time you can't get people together. Those committees help to figure out what's the best way for us to communicate the status of our company, how we're going to, go about keeping things safe, and then how are we going to be successful and make sure that we still have jobs at the end of 2020. And so I think we leaned on our ownership culture committees throughout that to try to strengthen those processes and play mini games, as we're going to hear, to actually find some quick wins and see some success in a year that was really tough to find some wins.
Krisi, that's awesome. And for our listeners who are new to this idea of culture committees, what I'm hearing you say is that a culture committee, whether you're employee owned or not, is a valuable thing for any size company. We happen to have a culture committee at each of the 10 SRC companies, but it's really their responsibility to be stewards of the culture and almost like a liaison between management and everybody else in a way. And so you don't have to be employee owned to have a culture committee at all. But also the other big differentiator is this is not a group of, established leaders. These are everyday people that have what Jack calls the gotta wanna. They want to be a part of something special. They want to contribute, and they're already leading in a way anyway. They're probably influencers in your organization. You probably know people who have quote unquote it that you look for, right, for your first culture committee. So for everybody listening out there, think about it. It's regular folks doing some pretty unregular stuff. It's volunteering for additional work. It's about taking that stewardship of the culture of your organization very seriously and taking it to the next level. So as we get ready to go into a deep dive on SRC, I wanted to make sure that it was clear that anyone can have a culture committee, and it's not going to be made up of top leadership. Does that sound about right, Krisi?
It does, absolutely. And as we get through and talking with this, though, I think we should share some ideas on how we've had some leaders within our organization, and Rob is one of them, that in order to make sure that the committee was elevated and the authority was there, he did lead their ownership culture committee for a period of time. So as you're getting things started, there's nothing wrong with having really strong top leadership support, even to kind of set the tone. But beyond that, we look for this as a way for people to create those leadership skills, to get that chance to get that familiarity with their management, to get a little bit of face time, right, in front of in big staff meetings. So it doesn't down the road doesn't have to be top leadership, but as a top leader, I wouldn't want them to be afraid of kind of, grabbing it and getting the tone set in the right way.
Krisi, I'm glad you point that out, because this may help some of our listeners to understand that it is a bit of a transition, right? The idea of these committees, how you're describing it, is a way to kind of turn over the responsibility of the culture to a broader group, but that doesn't just happen automatically, and that you have to have that leadership. You got to begin with that right leadership to really drive it first and really show how important it is, and that it is important for everyone, so people kind of grab it and run with it. And I think that's an important point to make, because a lot of people do kind of make that jump, and they put a culture committee together and just expect it to happen, right? And it doesn't happen that way unless there's a lot of leadership support. Rob, would you mind commenting a little bit on that? A little bit of the story of how your culture committee has evolved?
Sure. Yeah. We, going back probably, 8 or 9 years, I think we started our ownership culture committee like in maybe 12 or 13. And it ran for a couple of years with the HR manager being the top person. And after a couple of years, she came to me and said, look, I don't really want to do this anymore. And it wasn't going very well. We had some other issues within the factory in terms of morale, and we just, had some business issues where people were not engaged. And, all of my other managers were their bandwidth was pretty low. And so I said, okay, I'm just going to take this thing on myself for a while. And, so I did. I tried to build the committee up. And, one of the things I did was I called the other chairs of the OCCs within SRC. So I called somebody at SRC Automotive and talked to them. And I talked to the guy or the lady that was at C&H Reman, their open book committee, and really just tried to get ideas of what worked. And then, we had a chair of the OCC. I worked with that person, went to the meetings. And, eventually we decided to have two co-chairs, one person who was like a shop floor person and one person who was more administrative. And eventually I was able to step back from doing that. I mean, I would go to the meetings when they needed me. I would meet more with the chairs rather than with the committee itself. And it became self-sustaining. Those guys would make their own budget. They would come to me. I mean, occasionally they would have ideas that I was thinking to myself, well, that doesn't seem like a great idea. That seems like it could be a train wreck. But I wouldn't say that. I would just let them do it. And more often than not, it seems like what I thought was a bad idea turned out to be, a great idea. I mean, and it's like, I think it goes to the point that management doesn't have all the best ideas. The people a lot of times will have better ideas because they're the ones, they're doing the work every day. So
I love it. I just want to point out to our listeners that we can see each other on this as we record this podcast. And when you said management doesn't have all the answers, everybody nodded at the same time. And it kind of makes me think about what Jack always says, our job as leaders is not to have all the answers. It's to have the right questions. And that's awesome, Rob. Your experience with that, I love hearing about the fact that, you need to have leadership, but at the same time, enough autonomy to, as you say, make their own budget and kind of figure things out. And isn't that about developing leaders, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've had several people on the OCCs who they've moved on to get promoted to be like a first line leader, or they started on the shop floor and they moved into more of an administrative role, which may be a promotion for them. So, I think that the committees can be kind of a breeding ground for leaders. And that's a side benefit that you get with these committees.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, so at this particular podcast is about the Owner's Cup, and what that means. We're going to talk to Danielle about, what is the Owner's Cup and how does that relate. But I think anyone who's read about the Great Game of Business and SRC knows that we are a very competitive group. In fact, I think Jack Stack might be the most competitive individual I've ever met. in my life. And it certainly passes down through the organization in a big way. So Danielle Rapp, tell us a little bit about the Owners Cup, what it is, why it is, and how we implemented it at SRC.
Yeah, so the Owners Cup was started back in 2014. That was before my time. But as Krisi said, we had ownership culture committees across all the companies. But there wasn't as much, collaboration across companies as what there could have been, as well as support from holdings for the companies. So they came together, they built this competition for a few reasons, really to, one, leverage that extremely competitive spirit that we all have, to recognize our companies that were playing the game at a really high level and really sustaining the game, and to help bring those OCC chairs from each company together on a monthly basis to really collaborate and share some ideas and those best practices. How Rob was saying he was making phone calls around. Well, now we have those monthly meetings that really helps bring everyone together. Also, to really further build that leadership skills among those committee members and committee leaders. The competition does have some presentation pieces. They're leading meetings. They're meeting with executives across the organization, so that the competition really helps kind of propel that. But really, it's structured annually. So each of our companies compete against each other. And we like to say that the Owners Cup is really a tool that helps the OCCs be effective. So it's structured to where they're scored on different aspects of the game. So, know and teach the rules, follow the action and keep score, and provide a stake in the outcome. So they're scored on know and teach and how they're educating their associates on financial literacy, strategic goals, as well as that ownership piece. And how are they communicating effectively? How are their huddle cycles? Is everybody getting the information they need? Are they using scoreboards effectively? What scoreboards are they missing? What ones are they doing really well? How true are they staying to their forecasts? Forecast accuracy is a big piece of the points allocation. And then from the provide a stake in the outcome, they are scored on mini games as far as they get points for numbers of games played and their impacts on their critical number from those mini games, as well as, all the companies choose which mini game they feel was their best, and they get scored on that with peer judges. The OCCs get to score each other, and it's really a learning opportunity for them. And then that ownership piece is that ESOP education. What does it mean to be an employee owner? What are the benefits? What's important to know about it, and how can they contribute with that ownership mentality? And then just the other rewards and recognition. The companies have a lot of peer-to-peer recognition programs. So they are scored on really all of those aspects, and really comes down to how well do they sustain the game.
Danielle, I really like, everybody, when we put together committees, I think some of the struggle of ownership culture committees or any committee in an organization is to keep people engaged the whole time, right? To really know what the agenda is every month and what we're trying to accomplish. And it's the way you describe the Ownership Cup, it seems like you've not only set the agenda for them and how they can actually use that to really drive the agenda of the ownership culture committees, but also do it in a fun way. You've gamified it, and you've set it up and structured it. Curious about how that drives, success and competition. How has that helped you kind of drive some more engagement across the organization around our culture?
Yeah, well, we all know that things that get scored and measured get paid attention to. So when that scoreboard comes out monthly, our companies are itching for it. Our leadership, they want those scores, and the competition is tough. They love the competition, and it is fun. Like you said, it really adds a competitive spirit to it. And it really helps when we decide what we want the points allocation to be. Each year at the end of the competition, our OCCs come together and they decide, okay, what's working, what's not working, what improvements can we make, and how can we update that scorecard to reflect the needs of the organization. And so the OCC chairs actually make the updates to that scorecard every year. We make a few tweaks based on strategic focuses, needs in the organization, like I said, and that really helps make it their competition. And it really helps drive that engagement throughout the year. And it lets them focus on what they need to focus on. Krisi briefly mentioned that they have their own company goals. That's part of the Owners Cup as well, as they pick maybe 1 to 3 strategic goals for their OCCs that's really going to drive performance and help their company reach their financial and long-term strategic goals.
That's interesting. So if I understand what you're saying, you're not setting up the game from an SRC holding standpoint. You're really letting them set up the game, right? And I think that that's probably pretty critical in the success, that they have a lot of ownership in terms of how the ownership cup is set and scored and all of that goes with it. Well, let's take a minute then and talk to the winner of this year's Owners Cup, Rob Shear and the team at SRC Lexington. Congratulations, Rob, on the win. Can you tell us a little bit about the win and most importantly, just what kind of impact did it have with your organization?
Yeah, I mean, I would say people are competitive and they want to win, especially here. I would say the longer you're in OCC and the longer you're at SRC, the more I think competitive that you become, because we make everything into a competition, and people want those bragging rights, right? And I think that what we've tried to do over the last few years is, we focus on the scoreboard that they put out that Danielle puts out every year. And we think at the beginning of the year, all right, what are we going to do to hit this stuff? But the biggest thing is just constantly thinking about how you're going to improve playing the great game. And that's what the ultimate is. I want to just brag on my OCC chair just a little bit, Nina Conley. She's worked for me she worked for me before we were an SRC company. We were owned by another company before, and SRC bought us in 2009. And she kept working for the company that we were previously working for, Komatsu. And when she retired in 2015, my supply chain director, Becky, who's brilliant at managing people, she said, we need to hire Nina to work for us because of her knowledge about, our customer. So we hired her, and eventually she became involved in the OCC, and she is perfect because you want to talk about competitive. She's this is Kentucky, and so she's a Kentucky basketball fan, which, right now that's probably not the greatest thing, but they're going to miss the tournament. But she is somebody that she listens to the call-in show for Kentucky basketball year round. College basketball is only 4 or 5 months out of the year. She's on that, listening to that call-in show year round because she's such a fan. And she's taken that and she's transferred that to how competitive she is on the Owners Cup and just trying to be the best. So, I mean, she's a big part of it.
That's awesome. Well, a lot of people are going to be gunning for it this next year, so she's going to have even more competition.
Yeah, that's for sure. Rob, you said something I really want to dig into just for a minute. If we go back to what you said about just playing the great game of business better, I witnessed that at Great Game. So, I mean, we're one of the 10 companies, and I saw Dan Heisler and Chris Sheldon and the OCC team talk about, hey, we need to re-up our huddle. We need to, and one of the things that we brought back into it was recognition. So every week we brought this one little component that, well, they write books about us. We must be the experts, but man, it's so incredible. Just that little extra, anybody got any recognition? And quickly people are recognizing one another. Every week that really adds a lot to it. Did you notice anything like that, a tweak or something to a huddle or to the way you work together, like a great game practice that was really something transformative?
Yeah, so one of the things that we did with the Owners Cup this year that we embraced was the education about the game, and the Get in the Game book, and of course, we went through the certification. All the GMs and the VPs got certified as internal coaches. So that, and the education of the OCCs, those kinds of things went hand in hand. And one of the things that I noticed when we were going through the certification is selection of the critical number was not something that we really emphasized. And so we do the Great Game Survey, and part of that is the input survey. Mm-hmm. So we use the input survey this year as part of our process to select the critical number, which I think was a practice that we hadn't been doing that we'll do from now on. And, Nina used that in the presentation that we did for the Owners Cup mm-hmm. as a, kind of like a best practice. So, yeah, I mean, I think that was one thing that we did differently this year that we hadn't really been doing.
I love that because it just shows that even people that have been playing for a long time benefit from revisiting and reinforcing the practices that really bring it to life. I don't know, Krisi, you've seen a lot through all the different companies, and Danielle, you as well. Could you have any other examples of one practice that popped up to the surface in one of the other divisions?
I'll add to that. A big thing that I saw at Lexington this year, we don't get to travel down there a whole lot from Springfield, but we got to this past year. And I think they saw a lot of a trickle down effect from those critical number exercises that they went through. The engagement and the mini games that came out of it were just so impressive. And we've had companies in the past, I'll brag on SRC Logistics a couple of years ago. They were having a bit of a tough year. They were not forecasting to do super well. So they rallied together and said, and their general manager, Mike White, said, what do we want to do about this? So they ran a ton of mini games and they actually pulled themselves. I don't think they were scheduled to get into bonus territory at all. And they ended up being in level 11 bonus, I believe, wow. Just from mini games. And a big part of that was the work of the OCC and part of the Owners Cup, as well as coupling that with that leadership support that Rob's talked about.
That's cool.
Oh, very good. Very good. Well, we've spent a lot of time talking about kind of the concept of ownership culture committees and the cup and some of the benefits from this and even some of the structure. I guess this is a question for each of you, is that we probably have some listeners that say, yeah, that sounds like something that we could maybe do in the organization that could help. Would each of you provide us provide the listeners maybe one or two tips on how you would go about starting it? How do you get started with something like this? And I'll start with you, Krisi.
Sure. I think you got to start with the right people, right? Who's the who. Start with the right leadership in that. And I mentioned it earlier, but what I always recommend to people is think about who are your informal leaders within your organization? Who are the people that already just get it, right? They're passionate about your culture. They're passionate about the company, and they want the long-term success. And think about those individuals at every level of the organization, because what you're wanting to do is you want to kind of look at your company as a whole and then identify people in each area, or at least in each, grouping, within your organization. So whether you've got some within professional, some in our organization, some production, and these different pockets of your company. And then that allow them to come together and really feel that authority and accountability to help sustain your culture and help improve morale and help improve people's understanding. There's so much that these individuals can really accomplish and make a big impact on your company. And people want to, right? They just don't always know how. And so I would just, my first tip is start with the right leadership. Think about the who.
So there's nothing wrong with seeding your first ownership culture committee in some ways, right? Where I think some companies think, well, I'll just ask anybody that wants to volunteer, but you want to put some top-notch people in there that can give us some momentum, is what I hear.
Absolutely. And people like there's nothing wrong with tapping somebody on the shoulder and say, you know what, I see great potential in you. I really believe that you could make a big impact on our company. And I want you to be a part of this initiative as I get it started. And then absolutely ask for volunteers. I mean, I have a whole list of suggestions, so I don't want to do everything, but finding that time to ask for volunteers, but don't just make it one of the things that I think we've made mistakes over the years is by just saying, anybody, right? We just want anybody who's interested to come and be a part of this. Have some guidelines, have some things, this needs to be somebody who is a good performer, right?
Yep.
Doesn't have absentee issues, doesn't have, any kind of something that might actually take away from the success of the group. Because as others are looking at your group, they're like, is this really a leader in my company? So, be selective because you want this group to have authority and respect. So think about who should be a part of that leadership team.
Great. How about you, Danielle? A tip?
Yeah, so to piggyback a little bit off of what Krisi said, when you think about that who, think about their experiences and their qualifications as well. There's nothing wrong with taking some time to get them trained up. We actually did that as a bit of a refresh this past year. All of our OCCs went back through the gig on demand with Steve on the community and a few other trainings just to really make sure that they had that refresh. Just because they're here for a long time, you can't always assume that it's all part of sustaining the game, is to refresh on some of that training. When thinking about structuring the competition, one thing that I think I've learned a lot in these past few years is making sure it's theirs. It's especially those type A leaders in an open book and a great game company. It's easy to want to say, I think this is the direction we should go. I'm the one that sends out these documents. And we've all had those moments where we've had those lessons learned of, this isn't theirs anymore, or they're going to do the best with this if they're the ones who've created. I mean, people support what they help create. We all know that. So that would be a big key is when you have those leaders identified on your OCC, partner them with leadership to really build out this competition and understand that it's not, you can start small in these competitions. Ours is pretty big, but only because it's evolved every year. Every year we make changes and updates to make it the scoring more accurate on an administrative side, as well as scoring to really address the needs of the organization. Critical numbers change every year. Scoreboarding gets updated. The competition should evolve with that.
No, that's great. It's great. How about the champion?
Who, me? So I think that when you're starting up the like an OCC, and this applies to a lot of things when you're trying to do culture changes, the senior leadership has to own that. They've got to own the culture. And as the GM, I see my role as being strategy and culture before anything else. And so you may have to be more involved in the beginning, and you may not be able to delegate as much as you normally would. Eventually you can, but you got to send the message that it's important. And the way to do that is to make sure that the senior leadership is involved. They know the great game, and they know the culture.
That's awesome.
Great.
Well, I've got to say that this has been a lot of fun, but I have another big question. We cannot get through a single podcast without somebody bringing up mini games. We can't. I mean, it always comes up because that's where the rubber meets the road, where people take ownership of a metric or a number that they're going to have to be driving. And as Danielle wisely pointed out, people support what they help create. Rob Shear, I understand you guys had a killer mini game. Could you talk about that? Did that throw you over the top? Tell us about your awesome mini game.
Sure. So the problem we were trying to solve was, we're a remanufacturing business, so our raw material is used parts that come out of the customer machines and they come back from the field. We're in the construction and mining business. So, if we don't get these things back, they're called cores, then we don't have a business. And we were, from our supplier, who's also our customer, we were getting some of these cores back that were wrongly identified. So we needed part number X, and they would send us part number Y mistakenly. They didn't know, because these things can be hard to identify. And so my materials and production folks said, hey, let's have a mini game where we try to rope the customer in to making the improvements. And so they reached out to our customer, and our customer is in Ripley, Tennessee. So they called this thing Ripley's Believe It or Not. And it was awesome. And so they worked together with these guys, And so what the problem was these parts, they're these dirty old parts. The customer was getting them in. They're not technical people. They were misidentifying the part X as part Y, and they were sending them to us. And so we would get them. We would take the time to send them back, and then they were going back to the customer. And in some cases, these parts were getting scrapped. So we were getting a double hit. It was more work for us, more work for them, and then we're getting less sales. And so we worked with the customer to create these sheets that help them identify these parts. And so we worked with them, and now, we were getting 12 of these misidentified parts a month, and now it's down to like 1 or 2, and we're sustaining that. But the great thing is that our customer is now calling us when they see something. They call the guy on the shop floor, the team leader, and see him as a source of expertise, which is so powerful. And, the customer people, they were so happy because nobody ever asked them to do improvement projects. And when they won the game, one of the prizes was an SRC hoodie. And we love to give out SRC swag to our customers. We do these joint improvement projects, and then we'll put something on the hoodie that shows that it was some kind of project we did with them. And so they sent us a picture of them in their hoodies. And I use that we do like a time every month where I spend like 10, 15 minutes with every group and talk to them about what's going on. And I said, look, I want to see more mini games. And I showed a picture of the team leader that was the main guy in this mini game, just so proud there with his hoodie on. I showed the one with the customers, and I said, guys, some of the departments never play, and I want to see some of that this year. So we're going to do something different this year. We're going to have a mini game cup here in Lexington. And, there's awesome. Going to be some kind of financial reward with that. And of course, a cup, bragging rights, that kind of thing. And I'm hoping that we can get more mini games kickstarted this year, and just held this one guy up as an example. He just did a great job.
If I could ask a follow-up on that, do you have any idea, or did you guys quantify the value of that mini game?
Yeah, I think they said they saved, it was 80 or 90,000, but I was sort of asking some questions. I said, did you quantify the sales that we were losing? And they didn't think about that. And so if we get 10 more parts a month, that's something that we're getting those sales and that margin. It's not really in the 80 or 90,000 that we directly saved.
So when you annualize this thing, because you said it was sticking, it was something that you're maintaining and sustaining right now because of the behavior and systems changes, this thing is probably worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you included your customer. And I just think that's powerful, because you've got I heard morale, pride, expertise, all these great people issues, but also a financial issue. It goes right back to the name of this podcast, right? We're changing the game. It's rapid financial results, lasting cultural change. I think it's a great example.
Yeah, no, it was really awesome. We've had the team leader who he is terrified of public speaking, but he's briefed this mini game several times, to our Jack Stack. He came in October, and this guy was absolutely terrified, but he did a great job. You couldn't tell. And, we're just so proud of him and the team.
Yep. That's the example of building leaders, right? So, hey, this has been great. A lot of great information on ownership culture committees, and specifically how you can kind of drive the success of these through competition with the Owners Cup. Before we leave you, what is something we may be missing? Is there any question we should be asking you?
So I would say, I don't believe we talked about what was the total financial impact that was made by MiniGames throughout the entire organization in 2020, because we did lean on them heavily, because we knew, our plans were a little bit out of reach as programs and supply chain was impacted through the pandemic. So if I were you, I would ask us, what was the total financial impact? And
what was the financial impact?
It was almost $2.8 million.
Wow.
organization through the success of MiniGames.
Amazing.
That's huge. That is huge. Any others?
Come on, Rob, what did we forget to ask you?
So what's the what's been the sort of lasting cultural change here in our factory because we of these committees, and not just the ownership culture committee, but also we have committees that are based on community involvement and that kind of thing.
Love it. Well, I would just like to say on behalf of Rich and myself and all of the Great Game community that's listening, Krisi Schell, Rob Shear, Danielle Rapp, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
So let's keep the conversation going, everybody. Send us your questions, your stories, your best practices, your ideas, your challenges, and your victories. Remember, you are not alone. The global Great Game of Business community is probably the most intelligent and sharing community we've ever seen, and that is capitalism at its best. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.